with all the holiday craziness, a family leaves the child alone at home, and so that, of course, is the Home Alone series. I'm John Chang, Dan Edmonds.
Hi there.
Yeah, I think one thing we didn't really do this year was a retrospective. So I thought I kind of maybe um, if you had one kind of remake that you kind of enjoyed the most this past year, what might it be?
Mm. Oh boy, yeah. Okay. Retrospective of remakes. Yeah, I'll have to think about that a little bit more. What's been your favorite so far?
um, I think for the most part, uh,
Probably June. June was also one
yeah,
of my favorites, just for
yeah,
just
that's definitely up
general
there.
production value and storytelling and acting and things like this. It was generally pretty good.
Definitely, that was kind
Just
of
one that
a
sticks out. But yeah.
somewhat of a surprise. It definitely I think we had some hopes going into it, but it definitely I felt like it didn't really disappoint. Yeah, unlike so many that we've seen over the course of watching these and stuff.
I mean, my surprise one that I did quite enjoy, just because it was so strange,
Mm,
was the Frankenstein remake, the
okay,
2015 with Carrie Ann Moss. I kind of enjoyed that just because it was just yeah, didn't I just wasn't what I was expecting at all.
right. And then the other one I think that came somewhat as a surprise was Candyman. I mean, that kind of
Yeah,
yeah, just was much more. It brought a lot more to the table than we expected of a typical remake of in horror, for that matter. I mean, a lot of times, horror remakes tend to be cash grabs where they, just kind of are light on substance and heavy on just kind of like doing some weird kind of ideas that they were trying to, and certainly we'll kind of well, we sort of bit of that with several, like, not least of which with the more recent the Nightmare on Elm Street one that we discussed as well.
yeah. Of course, we did most of the Universal monsters this year as
Oh
well. Any
yes.
any unexpected or surprises in any of the ones we watched there?
Um, I can't say so much surprises other than the Frankenstein stuff. A lot of them were pretty much like pretty much what we more or less kind of expected, that like that the
Yeah.
remakes were going to be pretty shaky at best.
Yeah, I think if I had anything that surprised me the most out of those, it was how much I enjoyed the originals from the 30s
Mm,
and how pacey they were and actually, you know, were generally good movies, which I was expecting them to have to be a bit of a
and
chore to make it through, but they were actually really, really quite good.
I think the other thing was that there was maybe things that like I just didn't pick up as a kid watching them and stuff, that like
Yeah.
on the rewatch you realize how universal the themes of, like, how much that the love was like kind of an aspect of it, that like was motivation of why the different monsters were trying to either bring somebody back to life, or trying to kind of uh or what they were trying to do with their powers and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. It was a good deep dive into gothic horror
Mm,
mostly this year, but yeah. Which I had, funnily enough, as we mentioned in Nightmare on Elm Street,
mhm.
sort of similar to Home Alone in a way, in that we had
Interesting.
Nancy setting up traps to catch Freddy and
Right.
bring him into
Right,
reality. Here
you
we've
did
got
mention it.
Macaulay Culkin trying to trap Joe Pesci, who's almost as frightening as Freddy. So
Well, yeah,
yeah,
let's dive in then.
yeah,
Yeah, so like I said, there were definitely traps abound once we got things rolling and stuff. I one thing I missed on the first watch, like way back when and stuff like that, was how they did set up the idea that, like, okay, it's plausible that like these this family, as big as they are, would leave a
yeah,
kid by himself, and like kind of that they had the count thing, and then where they inserted this kid that, like, conveniently looks somewhat like Kevin and behind and stuff like that, and then that then he's just kind of like, okay, bye. Hey, kind of, he was just there just for that one part and stuff.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's not totally inconceivable if you've got 11 children and you're
Mm,
really, really running late for a flight that maybe you would leave one of them, I suppose. Um, I still don't think it's very likely, but you know, it's. I mean, I think it's kind of. I mean, from what I gather, John Hughes, who wrote and produced this, but didn't direct it, interestingly enough.
Right.
I think he wrote this as a result of working with Macaulay Culkin on Uncle Buck, and this was a part specifically written for him. And I think it's this kind of what's sort of endearing or charming about this movie is basically that you've got this kid in a sort of a fairly bit of a sort of a dilemma who faces it quite stoically and quite sort of upbeat and finds it all quite funny and does this sort of, you know, playing the adult is you know, that's always quite sort of, people love to watch kids doing that. So yeah, but he's quite a stoic kind of hero in a way,
right,
in this.
but yeah, you're definitely right that it's based on, you know, kind of like, I think that's what Hughes was good at, was recognizing talent and then really just kind of tapping into that. And he really leaned into this one that he, you know, like, because really it's kind of like sometimes we jokingly called you know, some other remakes, whatever, like, you know, kind of star vehicles and stuff. Here's, you know, like at the time, you know, I mean, we didn't know it, but like this was, you know, kind of his rising star and stuff. You know, like it like he had been in, you know, like you said, Uncle Buck, and he had, you know, others kind of different things and stuff like that. But then pretty much after this, his career took off as a child actor. You know, like subsequently, of course, that led to other kind of things, you know, what we've seen before with child actors, that like a lot of times they struggle with like kind of the transition to adulthood. And that's similar to what happened with Macaulay Culkin. But in this case, though, like at the time, yeah, it definitely like kind of, you know, launched him into that arena and stuff.
Yeah, and it's quite something to write a script where basically the entire script is focused on the child, and the child has to hold the audience for the entire, you know, 2 hours or 1 hour 30, whatever. So it's, you know, whatever you may think of Macaulay Culkin, I think he's actually pretty damn good in this movie to pull off, you know, some of the sort of the more nuances of the reactions and in the various scenes of, you know, him pretending as a kid to be pretending to do something when he's watching the gangster movie and things like this, and also the interactions with the adults where he has to be really kind of like the checkout lady, where he's really just sort of like, you know, has a whole bunch of attitude to sort of throw at her. It's pretty impressive, really.
It reminds me a lot of like the whole Calvin Hobbes thing, that like we have this fascination, or we are really entertained by a child that has like kind of very adult ideas and expressions, and, you know, like kind of like they are in some ways a reminder of, you know, kind of being a kid, but meanwhile with the point of view of an adult and stuff. So like it brings us into that, you know, kind of world, and, you know, allows us to kind of like both be a little bit nostalgic, but also like kind of kind of it's kind of like a wink and nod, kind of with almost, you know, various kind of lines or other things that they're doing and stuff.
Yeah, and I mean the shopping trip was something that really caught my attention on that same point, because basically he sort of blunders his way through this by basically acting as much like an adult as he possibly can. So it's just like, you know, it's just, oh, I've got a coupon for that, and do you like those microwave meals and things like this. And it's one of those things. This sort of reminded me of when you hear interviews with hypnotists, and they say if you throw something really unexpected at someone, then they just sort of, they get totally thrown out of their normal train of thought. And that's sort of the impression you get from him trying to do this. And the fact that, but also, I mean, this is a 90s movie, clearly, because we're very cynical in this. You know, we've got the 90s cynicism, because there's no adults who really seem to be looking out for this kid who's just wandering around by himself through the neighborhood and going shopping. Which shows that, you know, yeah, people don't really give a toss about kids in the 90s. So,
but that's another kind of point, though, that we've also talked about before. Like other times it's probably like teens that like kind of, you know, look at adults as kind of, you know, the whole idiots thing or whatever, something like that. But in this case is kind of like, you know, where we just see time and again that like, you know, it's like again his world, and like where the adults kind of like like it's they're one removed from the whole Charlie Brown thing of like want kind of
Yeah,
like for
yeah,
the most
absolutely.
part.
Yeah, and I think that's that's half the charm of this is as well is this idea that how would a kid break all of its domestic rules?
Mhm.
If it had the chance, it had the chance, and you see him eating junk and all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of interesting. But I think moreover than that, um, it's kind of got this element of children facing up to their fears and what they and how you
Mm.
deal with that, which is really quite. It's quite. It's quite a compelling sort of subtext in that
Mhm.
he starts off being afraid of old Marley next door, who's this
Mm.
potential serial killer with a shovel.
Right.
But then when after he's had a couple of encounters with the burglars, and he's actually, it's a really interesting scene where he overhears them planning that they're going to come back at 9 o'clock.
Right.
And then you see all of this kind of shift in his character where he's now kind of suddenly desperate, and he's going to try and track down Santa just to sort of ask for his family back.
Right.
And he goes to the church and he finds old Marley there.
Mhm.
And of course, now, this impending, attack from these burglars has made the threat of the neighbor seem insignificant.
Mm.
And whilst he's, and they've mirrored it quite nicely with him having to sort of face up to this realistic threat, and with Marley and him being too afraid to get into contact with his son. So there's this
Mm.
really nice sort of moment of him reality setting in and what he's got to do. And how does he deal with that reality? He sets lots of very dangerous and violent traps. So
Right. I think that's also an interesting point though about how he like Marley's like this person that initially is symbolizes kind of like I guess like the childhood fears, right, and stuff. Because
yeah,
like even one of the things he talks about in that conversation about he talks about the stove, right, in the basement and stuff, and
yeah.
how like he was always afraid of it until he
Started doing the washing.
started doing the washing,
Yeah, yeah,
kind of.
yeah,
So it's interesting how like there's these layers of like kind of where once he started facing his childhood fears and stuff, it kind of like propelled him into like kind of facing these other fears with like kind of this renewed kind of courage and stuff. And I guess in some ways it's this thing of like once you build momentum, you kind of like can take on more and more and stuff.
yeah. And also there's this kind of thing of responsibility in that at first he's just wrecking the house and eating junk food and
Mhm.
everything. And towards the end, you've
Right.
got him doing the washing, going out shopping, and it's kind of like
Right.
he's adopted all of the sort of responsibilities he should
Yeah.
be, and to the point where he's protecting the house as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's quite interesting. It's a very sort of optimistic film about what they think children will do when they're left
Mm.
alone for any period of time. Because I'm not entirely convinced my daughter would start doing all the washing and shopping and things like this. But anyway,
Yeah, there's this kind of weird dichotomy with that, because in some ways it seems like an anti-Christmas movie, right? Because he's, like you said, he starts off doing everything naughty possible and everything,
mm,
and like you said, there is this kind of optimism that like somehow the light bulb will go on and he will like kind of transform into this kind of man in the house and stuff like that. So it's kind of this weird thing on the one hand, like kind of we're normally like kind of the Christmas message, right, is kind of to be good and like kind of like Santa's watching kind of thing. But meanwhile, like here he is like kind of doing like I said, he's eating junk food, he's kind of staying up late and watching movies he's not supposed to and stuff like that.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, also I would say you can tell this is a movie of the 90s, because actually when
Mm-hmm.
you sort of take a step back and look at what these burglars are doing,
Mm-hmm.
they're pretty nasty.
Mm.
This is kind of like quite an edgy kids movie, really, in that
Right.
you've got these guys that are impersonating policemen and
Mm-hmm.
entering people's houses and trying to sort of find out information about what their Christmas plans are. Then there's a point where they almost sort of run him over, and then they're
Mm.
stalking him with a van,
Right.
and then of course they're trying to break into his house. But yeah, it's and they're not like kind of, aside from the slapstick humor,
Mm-hmm.
they're fairly out and out bad guys, really. They're going ruining people's houses and everything. So yeah.
Well, I mean, although Joe Pesci has done some, comedy stuff, but for the most part, does a lot of very dark roles in these gangster movies and everything.
Of course, yeah.
Like he's kind of on one hand, he's kind of like short and kind of treated like a comic character and like that. But like I mean, everything from like Raging Bull to Goodfellas to Casino. I mean, like he's not like a laughing matter, kind of for the most part.
Yeah, and I mean, this probably was one of the earliest ones where you saw Joe Pesci in a kind of a comedic role, a bit like when they had Robert De Niro in Meet the Parents and things like this. So,
Right.
it has that kind of charm to it as well. But yeah, I mean, there's also the other siblings are pretty horrible, and also at the beginning he's pretty obnoxious. He's there saying, I want my whole family to die, and I wouldn't care if I don't see them
I
tomorrow.
know.
You wouldn't get a kid that obnoxious in a Disney movie these days, that's for
No.
sure. But yeah, and they're not afraid. Also, well, I would say John Hughes is not afraid of showing him being afraid. Like the first few nights, there's things when he's going down to the boiler and he's like hiding under his parents' covers and things like this. They wouldn't sort of push that much sort of fear, I don't think, into a more modern movie in this setting. But
I think one other thing that this movie really echoes is like the wish come true kind of thing, being both a blessing and a curse. Because we saw that with, of course, George Bailey, kind of like, wishing that he was never been born. Like we saw that with, the bishop kind of wanting to, help for, getting the church off the ground, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it's like each time, like kind of, it's like, be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? There's a lot of Christmas movies where you're doing wish fulfillment, isn't it? Yeah, it's a common theme. I suppose that's kind of, it almost goes back to maybe Scrooge in a way, and that he's kind of, that's one of those things where he wishes everyone would just leave him alone, and then, and then he realizes what his life would really be like when he does that. So,
right.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think as well in terms of the performances, Macaulay Culkin's actually very good in it. I mean, it's when it comes to the actual slapstick humor, it's funny. I mean, Joe Pesci's surprisingly good at slapstick kind of humor in this. As I'm not even kind of remember what the name of the other actor in it is as the other
Daniel
thief.
Stern.
Yeah, Daniel Stern. Yeah, they're both very good in it, and it's kind of it's the surprise that's actually the most sort of enjoyable bit of them, because then when the spider's thrown in his face and stuff like this, it's all very quite funny. But I think Catherine O'Hara is excellent as the mom as well. She really sort of it's weird to think of her doing a really sincere role like that, because normally she's very tongue-in-cheek, but
definitely
but my favorite bits, of course, is the John Candy scene where he's talking about leaving his child in the funeral parlor was great.
Yeah, he comes in and just basically just like I think it's like kind of he's like this kind of breath of fresh air for the second, third act and stuff, and just anytime I think he's kind of allowed to run amok and stuff, and apparently like a lot of his lines are just improvised. He just like a lot of it was just not like kind of like they just kind of like give him general direction and stuff like that, and allowed him to kind of be John Candy. That's like that's pretty much a like kind of a license to kill comically and stuff.
Yeah because I mean it's good because he's quite sort of sincere, and you think, oh, he's a nice guy when they first meet him, and then when they're in the van, it's he's just given free rein, which is great. But yeah, there's also the point, of course, that some of the the traps that he sets could be potentially lethal.
Oh
like the cans of paint,
I talked offline about this movie Better Watch Out, where they basically replicate the whole paint can thing and stuff like that. The twisted kind of guy in that one was to see like whether it's actually lethal and stuff, kind of like an experiment and everything.
No, I think there's and that's what's really good about both Daniel Stern and Joe Pesci's performances. The slipping on the ice on stairs, they really do accurately. It doesn't seem like a major thing to happen, but that is like really painful when you do that.
I
So
know.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, I'm trying to think of, there's I don't know the actor's name, but the guy who plays Buzz, Mcallister,
Oh,
is pretty good as the sort of the teenage kind of bully stroke creep. He's pretty
right.
good.
Yeah,
So,
he's definitely like kind of like I guess like the perfect kind of mean big brother, I guess.
yeah. It's kind of odd that they would all come back on Christmas. Well, I suppose they will fly back, don't they? It's a bit strange, but yeah. I don't know. It's just a fun family favorite. It's difficult to find anything that's too much to complain about, really. It's kind of cheesy, and it's weird and interesting actually that you've got John Williams as the guy doing the soundtrack, because it doesn't sound very much like a John Williams soundtrack. This one.
No.
In fact, and definitely towards the end, it's more or less like a cartoon kind of soundtrack. It sounds very much, like you'd hear on Tom and Jerry or something.
Well, I mean, like that's kind of like some of these different cartoons that are so memorable, right? Like Bugs Bunny or whatever. That like it's like they were like kind of they really found a second life for classical music, and for kids, right? It's like kind of almost like giving them a dose of culture without them kind of realizing it, like kind of slipping, kind of the medicine, I guess, with the dog food kind of thing and stuff.
Yeah, and I'd say that's the overall thing. I mean, it's quite a depressing story, really, if you think about it. A kid who gets abandoned at Christmas, and there's people trying to break into his house. But they kind of make it into a cartoon slapstick thing. So
part of the one other thing, like kind of worth mentioning was like it's interesting also how like a lot of these movies, there's this, and I think the reason why I think about this is because I was watching this documentary about like the Jewish people and Christmas and stuff, and what we really have is like kind of like just even here, like the church, right, is this kind of like the symbol of like kind of what Christmas is really all about and stuff like that. It's like kind of like this idea of that, like, Christmas is the one time a year we're supposed to really remember that, what the true meaning is and everything like that. But yet like it's like a lot of the holiday favorites, like that like the most popular songs, right, like Most Wonderful Time of Year, all these kind of like songs. It's interesting how like they're not religious songs, they're just all very secular. And so what it was like during a certain period, there's all these Jewish songwriters that were doing the music because they just needed like kind of whether it's for a movie or for commercials and stuff like that, like, so it's interesting how like this kind of thing of where whether you want to kind of like be cynical and kind of call it appropriation of Christmas, or on the other hand, like other people might call it commercialization. But really what it is I feel like that Christmas kind of really started transitioning from being a strictly religious holiday to be something that like was more global, like, because it was something that like where then more of a sense of people coming together, and more of a sense of like, okay, this time of year, like people will exchange gifts and kind of get together and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. No, I mean, some of my good buddy from Dubai, he celebrates Christmas probably more so than I do, to be honest with you. It puts me to shame most of the time. Yeah. So I guess, well, this Christmas, of course, we've seen there's the new Disney Home Sweet Home Alone,
yes,
which is what we'll be comparing this to. And I've actually watched this 4 times at the request of my daughter this year. So that's been kind of a Christmas, somewhat of a favorite. So yeah, how did you find this experience, John? Not that you have any young children that will need to actually sit through this many times, but
yeah, I would say that like I have not sat through it 4 times. And on the other hand, it was actually not too painful for like kind of a remake and stuff. It was actually surprisingly, it did keep me pretty entertained. I think for what it is, like despite like apparently people on Rotten Tomatoes really are bashing and stuff like that, but I think for me, it's I do find Ellie Kemper, like pretty much anything that she's on, she's pretty entertaining and stuff for the most part. I think Bay, I guess I wasn't familiar with her, but she's actually like, yeah, definitely this Irish comedian that's been on a lot of different things and stuff.
Yeah, Aisling B. She's actually
okay.
Yeah, I know her mostly from comedy panel shows in the UK,
Okay.
like 10 out of 8 out of 10 Cats does Countdown, and
Okay.
8 out of 10 Cats, and Would I Lie to You, and all those kind of things. So she's, I mean, her stand-up's good as well. I think she's very funny, and then she plays it pretty straight in this. There's not, there's not really, it's not a sort of a big comedic role, and she does very well, I thought.
Pretty similar to Catherine Hare, what kind of like you said, the kind of more straight approach and stuff.
Yeah. I thought for me that the big downfall of this movie was that I think you had a lot of very talented comedians who were given bit roles and weren't really given any funny lines.
Yeah, that's true.
There was some pretty decent dialogue. I would say, having watched it, I didn't really catch most of it the first time. I think for me, the direction and the whole structure of the movie is a bit convoluted and a bit all over the place. So it's kind of, it doesn't have the same kind of simplicity that the original does. So it gets a little bit, you're trying to say, are these people where they're trying to get a doll and then they're trying to break it out, but they're good, but they're not bad, and he's there, but now he's with them, it all just gets a bit muddled.
Right.
But if you can, once you watched it a second time, then you know what the structure is. And so on the second and third time, I actually picked up some of the lines are quite funny, but I think it's more a case of probably the direction and the overall structure was too convoluted for them to land properly. But also just there wasn't, the dialogue wasn't really wasn't good enough. I mean, the parents or the thieves, we'll say, the big difference, of course, being in this one is that no one's a bad guy anymore.
Right.
We have to empathize with the people trying to break into the house. So what was your thoughts on that they tried to twist it around in this one?
Yeah, it's almost seemed like this kind of very much like the Disneyfication of it, and like where like almost like this kind of era that like, oh, we can't have like kind of criminals, and like it's like kind of, it's got to be just a misunderstanding, and like I thought that was like kind of a really almost unnecessary kind of twist to it, and and then the other thing I thought was interesting was just the whole central character stuff. Here of course he's called Max instead of Kevin, and Archie Yates. I actually thought it was the other actor from Jojo Rabbit that they chose, so I was surprised that they chose him, because he's a relatively minor actor in the other movie stuff, and I thought he like does kind of more or less carry the role, like where he's believable as like an intelligent kind of Kevin character as well, and I think that's why like kind of they chose him, is because he is like kind of like there is some kind of I think that's the thing that like you have to have for these movies, that like on the one hand they've got to start off kind of being unlikable enough that like like kind of that like they're this pain in the butt kid, but then over the course like kind of we're supposed to like really start liking them more and empathizing in some ways.
Yeah, that didn't work for me. I didn't want to empathize with him. I just found him annoying all the way through, really.
Okay.
He wasn't. I think for me, what's kind of nice about Macaulay Culkin is that he's quite obnoxious and he's got quite a lot of attitude. And Archie Yates, maybe he's got a great acting career ahead of him, but and also they didn't really make his character obnoxious enough. I don't think they could have gone. Disney probably didn't want to make him like a real little. So he didn't really seem too bad really at the beginning, and he didn't seem too good at the end either, really. And that's the problem, is if you try and mediate these these extremes too much, you don't really, and doesn't have as much impact. And his siblings are obviously not as nasty as the ones in the original either. So that all got a bit kind of, it was a bit blah. And really the focus, I mean, the story focused on the couple who were the thieves, really.
Right.
It wasn't even really about Max in this case so much. You know, it was, yeah. But I mean, they had some quite funny lines, and now and again, I mean, I quite enjoyed him going from being an avid on-prem IT guy to converting to the cloud at the end.
Right. Yeah, I was wondering about that. Like, what?
Yeah,
I was wondering about what your reaction would be to.
Yeah, that's yeah. It's funny. It's an ongoing you know, battle in the IT world. Is, do you go cheap and on-prem, or do you go in the cloud and spend more? And, yeah. Anyway, ho hum. Yeah. But you know, they were, you know, it's just sort of, I think when it's slapstick humor, which results from them just being kind of clumsy or inept, it doesn't land as well as someone actually, like, you know, being nasty. That actually kind of makes it funnier when someone's purposefully smashing someone over the head with a can of paint. And maybe I just enjoy, like, you know, 1930s slapstick humor too much or something. But yeah, it all seemed a bit sort of naff in that respect, and that they're just, you know, just not very good at it. But yeah.
Yeah, how's that line go with comedy? It's like kind of when the piano falls on you, but you survive, or something like that. Where
yeah, I was going to actually look at because there were lots of people in this movie that I thought, why have they not given them any decent lines? And, you know, they're comedians that I really, you know, really like. I'm trying to think. It's man. Well, Ashlyn B, obviously they could have given her more. But Pete Holmes, you know, he's normally very funny, and he you know, he kind of injected humor, I felt, into what was an otherwise very straight kind of part, really. You had Andy Daly, who I think is hilarious, and Chris Parnell. You know, Timothy Simons is really funny too. And
even Kenan Thompson, they threw in, you know, like, as the real estate agent.
Yeah. I mean, he kind of, you know, there was the whole thing about him being the physical trainer, is all right, but you know, he could have done with a lot better script, I think. I mean, or it could have just been a different movie if you're going to have all these comedians in a movie and then not really utilize them. You know, it's so yeah, that was kind of what I came away from. I just felt ashamed to have wasted all that talent on very sort of straight bit parts, really. Yeah, I mean, there is also, it's worth mentioning, of course, that they referenced the original movie by having Buzz Mcallister as the policeman in this. It's nice to see he's kind of quite creepy as a policeman, as he was creepy as a teenager as well.
Yeah, it's funny how, like, he even said, you know, like, kind of you know, felt like the brother and stuff like that. So just kind of, yeah, it was really interesting kind of having that callback and stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, it's so sort of contrived, though, that the whole reason they're trying to break into the house is because there's a doll with an upside down head that might be worth $50,000 or $500,000 or whatever it was on eBay.
Right.
That was already just like, man, can you just have the kid get lost, get forgotten? It's really just tried to overthink this way too much. But yeah, and it's quite long as well. It is a long kids movie, and I will say, on second, third watch, it was better than I expected. Because the first time we watched it, I think we actually had all the kids, me and another family, and within about half an hour, we'd lost about at least 2 or 3 of the kids. They got bored and gone off. About 40 minutes, we'd lost pretty much all the kids, and then at about an hour, I think most of the adults like, oh, let's see what else is on, you know. So
interesting.
Yeah.
So that sounds like that also resulted in a second watch, though, with your daughter, though.
Well, that's what was the most surprising thing, was that I said, hey, you want to watch something? And she goes, oh yeah, let's watch the Home Alone. And I said, oh, that's why. I said, no, the new one. I'm saying, oh Christ. But Yeah, actually, it was one of those things that actually, yeah, it wasn't too bad. Funnily enough, weirdly enough, yeah, it's maybe it's one of those things. It's like
Mm,
when you get familiar with
mhm,
something really terrible, it doesn't seem so bad
mm.
after a few watches or something. But yeah,
Yeah, other than the traps, I think it's interesting how they echo the church scene again, and like it's funny
that's
how
right. Yeah.
that's something that like, it's just I guess you know I- there's something to that. I think that we're basically as kind of as cynical and as kind of like people have really like had a falling out, I guess, in some ways with traditional religion, but yet
Mm.
the church still symbolizes kind of this callback of like where we um I don't know, I guess it's still the hub or the center for like kind of the communities to kind of during the holidays or during kind of different, of course, like kind of never mind like any funeral scene, right, and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's always it's hard to get away from this, as it's a place where you go for help, basically. So
Mm,
whatever, if it's vaguely Christian, it's a church. I'm sure it's similar for other religions as well. There's going to be
mhm,
somewhere where you go for either advice or help, and regardless of how cynical we get, those things will always. In fact, in a way, it's a sort of a statement against the cynicism, saying that
mm,
if things get really bad, you're going to need something like this to help you through it. I
mhm,
still find it amazing, though, again, that he's going into a church, an 8-year
mhm.
old all by himself, and
Right.
even neighbors like going, "Where are your parents? Like, where's yeah." But of
Yeah.
course, the whole movie wouldn't work if unless all of these adults were being completely oblivious to a child by itself. So
And where were cell phones in this? Like, like,
I think this was like 1990, wasn't it, or 1991?
yeah, yeah,
And they did. I paid attention to that because they kind of said right at the beginning, "Oh, your phone lines are out. It's going to take us a few days to fix them."
mhm,
So it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
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 forget about that in this
yeah,
movie.
yeah.
So yeah, no, I guess. I mean, funnily, I'm showing my age here, but I used to actually sell wholesale mobile phones
Mm,
in England back when they were the small little Nokias with the black and white screens.
right.
And what we forget is that not a lot of people were actually interested in mobile
Mm,
phones when they first came out. It was kind of like, I would say it took quite a while for the
mhm,
majority of my friends to actually have mobile phones.
mm,
Everyone was just like, well, they're expensive and you just got to find
mhm,
somewhere to put it. What's the point? You're going to go and see these people anywhere and just pick up the phone.
mm,
So it was actually surprisingly enough hard to
mhm,
sell mobile phones back
mhm.
then. I actually gave up. It was that hard to sell mobile phones, believe it or not. Now, God,
Yeah.
everyone's queuing up for whatever the next one is. But
And
different time.
people just when think of being without one, like I mean,
Oh
it's like
yeah.
they're just pretty much. It's funny how like the Star Trek vision, right, of personal communicators, kind
Mm.
of became a reality. Like kind of just I don't know. I guess a lot of it has to do with the fact that like there's so many other things now that they are capable of. And I think kind of Apple being like kind of no promotion intended, was definitely the driver of that when they kind of had this idea of the smartphone and stuff.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Yeah. Or just having it was all screen and no keyboard was the big sort of
Mm,
change, I think. So yeah. 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 Not a lot of cell phone use. I suppose there is some cell phone use, but yeah, I suppose that's the kind of thing now, is that a kid would be young enough that they probably wouldn't have a cell phone, which is why he couldn't use it
mhm,
in but you would have thought, I mean, God, what is he supposed to be, 8 years old?
mhm,
Then there had to have been some electronic device in his house that he would have been able to communicate. I mean, my daughter's pretty much figured out how to use Skype or
mhm,
FaceTime on pretty much all electronic devices in the
mhm.
house. So yeah, it's kind of unlikely. But
Yeah, just oddly absent in the remake. So, but I guess it's
mm,
like kind of, if anything, like you said, it's probably like this idea of like hearkening to a time that like this wasn't or they weren't as prevalent and everything, and then also like just overall it's just harder to support the already kind of convoluted premise.
I know, right? I mean, at least I suppose he spends most of his time actually in the house in the new one, doesn't he? From what I
Mhm.
remember,
Right.
so which is probably at least more realistic, I suppose. But
Hmm.
I was trying to see what actually, yeah, 1990 Home Alone, so you're barely out of the 80s,
Mhm. Right.
and so yeah, no, there wouldn't have been many people with cell phones in 1990,
No, no, yeah, that's for sure.
not at
Yeah.
all. No, God, I mean, I don't know if we even had Super Nintendo. I mean, it may have still been on NES in 1990. I don't know, but yeah,
Definitely, like you see once again, and that's something that's kind of like a minor note and stuff, but you definitely see the Chicago influence, because all the buzzes, like kind of sports cars and all that kind of stuff. We see even like a cutout of Michael Jordan. It's just kind of,
that's
yeah,
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
definitely the Chicago effect is, like which is like kind of one of the main connection with John Hughes as well, like kind of is there.
Right. Yeah, I did a little bit of reading on what inspired him, because sometimes, like with Nightmare on Elm Street, there's a number of factors that will kind of play into it. But this was simply just like his dad having anxiety when they were
Mm,
going off for family vacations.
right.
Basically, he just, yeah, made the
Yeah,
joke.
and like I said, it's interesting how he chose not to direct it and stuff like that. This
Mm,
was actually, like kind of Chris Columbus's one of his first shots at
yeah,
a bigger movie. And he of course went on to do kind of quite a few things. Like Mrs. Doubtfire and even some of the Harry Potter series and stuff.
yeah.
Um,
And I mean, I would say he pulled. I mean, he definitely pulled a good performance out of Macaulay Culkin, and I would
yeah,
say that I would say the same
absolutely.
is true for the first couple of Harry Potter movies. Those are still very
Yeah,
kind of you know the the acting in that from the three main kids is really good in those.
yeah.
It doesn't continue as time goes on, or it loses its charm as they get older. But he does a great job, with them in the first couple, because I think he just did the first two Harry Potter movies from what I remember. But
Mm.
yeah, that'll be, I guess, next year's Christmas movie or something we can do, because it always has some sort of Christmassy element, doesn't it? So, but they need to remake it, which of course they haven't yet. So
Yeah.
yeah, yet.
And then also, I thought it's interesting to note that, like, for the most part, like, other than the upcoming, planes, trains, and automobiles, John Hughes's kind of properties have been really relatively untouched, and
Yeah,
I think a lot to do with the fact that, like, a lot of them really are about kind of almost the A's are like a centerpiece of those and stuff.
yeah, and like you said earlier, the individual performances play such a key role in a
Yeah,
lot of those movies.
definitely.
What would I mean if you think about it in a way? Home Alone, Macaulay Culkin's character in Home Alone is more or less kind of like a smaller Ferris Bueller in a
Mm,
way.
yes.
It's very similar sort of,
Mhm.
um, uh,
Like between the traps and also like kind of like especially the kind of gimmick, if you will, of using like kind of the recording in the background and stuff.
yeah, yeah, kids kind of like getting into trouble, or being
Mm,
troublemakers basically, but sort of somehow doing things that is very difficult for adults to do. Because in
right.
Ferris Bueller, he's like heading up the parade and he's like driving around in a
Hmm.
Ferrari and getting the girl and all this kind of thing,
Hmm.
and annoying all the adults in the process. And this is kind of
Right.
like someone, an 8-year-old kid who's kind of like overpowering, burglars and stuff like this. So it's, yeah, that was the obvious kind of like connection
Mm,
that I found. But again, what would Ferris Bueller be without, Matthew Broderick? It wouldn't be the same movie at
no.
all.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Breakfast Club without the performances, or without
Hmm.
those actors, would be it would be a crap remake, is what it would be, like so many others we've watched. But
uh, yeah. It leaves to be seen when Hollywood will kind of go, can we remake John Hughes movies?
I know, it'll happen at some stage, I'm sure.
They're definitely going to try that with planes, trains, and automobiles, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah,
Yeah. Any other kind of thoughts? Kind of like I think we've kind of pretty much
I
covered.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've done it to death now, I think. Yeah, no, I think if I had a way to improve or remake Home Alone, I guess I would. I mean, yeah, make funny lines for funny actors and make the script simpler. Yeah, but do something other than, I don't know. Yeah, it was all right. It was like, nah, I don't know. I want to spend too much time thinking about how I could make Home Alone better, to be honest.
Yeah. So yeah, what's called what's next on the block show we kind of look at? I think we've kind of talked about some other ideas. Yeah, if anything, what would you like to talk about? I guess kind of coming up.
Well, I keep asking that we should do Death Note because I've always wanted to see the remake of that. So,
right.
Yeah, I'm absolutely up for watching Death Note again.
Okay.
You want to do Fargo?
I definitely want to do Fargo at some point soon and stuff. That's definitely one that, it also has the kind of the winter tones. Being kind of like based primarily in the upper Midwest of the country and stuff.
Yeah, we've been very blessed with lots of remakes from Hollywood this year, but it doesn't look like 2022 is as full. I haven't seen very many remakes, which is surprising. But
right.
Yeah. So if they come out, we'll definitely do them. But yeah, more look for some more obscure stuff for now, I think.
Sounds good. So yeah, once again, I'm John Chang with Ted Edmonds, and we'll see you at the movies.